Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the South Maui Climate Change Town Hall. Really excited to have everybody out there in Facebook land to join us all. My name is Pam Eaton, and I am the Division Chief for the Long Range Division that's part of the Maui County Department of Planning. I just want to quickly introduce some people's faces you'll be able to see and some you can't, my team. The Long Range Division. First, a huge thank you to Kate Blystone. Kate and her pretty face, there she is. She is the project lead for the South Maui Community Plan update. And Jamie, because I think we can see Jamie's face. Jamie Pa is basically our graphic queen, and Zarina, she's the one who does our website and all things graphic and all things creative. Folks you can't see, and that is the senior planner, Jennifer Maiden. And I know you guys all know Jen, and she's out there doing the tough stuff, handling Facebook and those logistics. Also Karen Komkowicz, and Karen is our planner 4. We're excited to have newly acquired on staff, as well as I think James Moore might be out there somewhere, who it's his 3rd day of work today. We're excited to have James. We may also have, I believe, Mike Napier, who is part of our GIS team, and Johan Lau, who's also part of the GIS team. So hopefully I haven't left anybody out, but huge thank you to the Long Range Division staff. Without any further ado, I'd like to provide a little bit of context. We have a panel of fantastic speakers for you all. Really excited to have these folks speak and get into some of these really critical issues as part of the South Maui Community Plan update. Before I hand it over to the panel, would just like to let folks know, I'm sure many of you that are listening are well aware of this, but we're always want to make sure folks hear this. But basically, what is the South Maui Community Plan? What is it? Why are we doing this update? Who should be getting involved? The context for tonight. So basically, the South Maui Community Plan directs future growth and development in South Maui over a 20-year time frame. Per the Maui County Code 2.80b, the plan outlines the community's vision for the future and is also a roadmap to achieve this vision. The goals and the policies and the actions that are set forth in this plan will direct the county in its planning, its programs, decision-making related to land use, review of development projects, changes to zoning and development regulations, and also prioritizing projects for funding and establishing new programs and initiatives. So right now we are in the midst, and many of you have been involved, and thank you for that, in the community engagement phase. That is really the first phase where we look at the data, look at the issues and things that need to be updated since since the existing plan was written and passed. It's been a very robust engagement phase. It's been great. Please, before I forget, and I'll be giving you several reminders, please go to our website, which is wearemaui.org. On the website, most importantly, you'll have available for you all of our released technical resource papers. So we have technical resource papers on transportation and mobility. We had that town hall last month, where there's a technical resource paper on housing, another one on population and the employment forecast, and recently released is the technical resource paper on climate change and hazards. So please take a look at that. Also part of community engagement, which is really important. We've done everything we can, and we continue to try to get the keiki involved and the youth involved. There's a really exciting community engagement project right now called Dream Big. That closes on July 31st. But basically, what we're trying and what we're going after is trying to find out, what does our keiki care about? What are their hopes and their dreams for the next 20 years? What do they want their community to look and feel like? So we're asking that the keiki, 18 years and younger, submit an essay, a poem or a song, a drawing or a painting, a digital art piece or a video, or even a choreographed dance. Please submit that. All the information's on the website. And you're doing that, you'll also have a chance to win one of 25 $10 gift certificates to the Maui Sweet Shop in Kihei. And thank you to those folks for donating those gift certificates. So back to our little Facebook town hall. And that is, we're looking at climate change and hazards and why are they part of the community plan? So basically what we want to look at and what we're trying to explore is how will the future impacts of climate change, coastal and inland flooding, tsunamis, and wildfires, for example, be addressed in South Maui over the next 20 years? What will be impacted? Our built environment. How will these changes and the things you're going to hear today from our experts looking at things such as infrastructure, road systems, water, wastewater, buildings, building footprints, how are those going to be impacted by the future of climate change and sea level rise moving forward and all these natural hazards? What about our natural resources? How will they be impacted? How about our cultural resources, traditions, and practices? What will those impacts be? These impacts are not isolated, nor are they standalone issues. They are interdependent with each other, as with other community issues we'll be exploring through the community plan. Before I forget, please visit StoryMap. Go to the website, look at the climate change paper, and look for a live link, and it'll say in blue StoryMap. It is amazing, amazing, amazing. Huge kudos to our GIS team. They did a beautiful job. What it does is it helps you to visualize the issues that need to be balanced. So there's phenomenal data layers in GIS and pictures and so forth that shows you some of the things and some of the overlaying impacts that are going to be happening with regard to this. Before I forget, want to let folks know how this works. Kate's going to walk us through that, but in the chat, Jamie will be putting a link where you can post your Facebook questions, and there's a lot of logistical behind the scenes, so we'll try to do this smoothly, but Kate, I'm going to have you walk us through how folks after each one of the speakers will be able to post questions and ask questions.
I am so sorry, folks. I had a hard time unmuting, but basically, if you've got a question for the panel, all you have to do, if you have a Facebook account, is type your question into the comment box. If you don't have a Facebook account, you can send us an email at this email address. We are southmaui@mauicounty.gov, and we'll make sure the question gets to the panel. Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Kate. All right, terrific. We are going to start with our first panel speaker, and that is Tara Owens. Tara Owens works for UH Grant, and we are very lucky to have her embedded with us in the planning department. She's just such an amazing resource. Tara's talk is going to be critical in terms of looking at, which I think she'll give us a beautiful overview of all these different types of hazards we're facing. Not only that, but looking at, which is really important, the history and the trends. So we can take a look at how to plan for early and later phases. The tools such as the sea level rise viewer, the dune restoration program, hotspots in South Maui, and things to look at maybe from a regulatory perspective, such as setbacks. So Tara, thank you so much. Can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Aloha, everyone out there in the virtual world. Let me get my screen share set up. Kate and team, are we okay? Okay, if I haven't heard otherwise, I assume all is well and folks can see my slides. Well, we can't see you, but we appreciate your participation out there. Again, I'm Tara Owens. For those who may not know me, I'm extension faculty for the University of Hawaii Sea Grant program and specializing in coastal processes and coastal hazards. In that role, I'm based here on Maui, where I serve as a connector to you, the community, and a partner to the county planners here that are truly the front lines of coastal management. Today, I'll give you a very brief overview of how climate change is affecting our coastal areas to help us consider how the community plan can influence our coastal resilience. So as you all know, we're tiny islands out here in the middle of the very big Pacific Ocean, and we are vulnerable to coastal hazards in unique ways. And climate change is a magnifier of these hazards. So that includes coastal storms and hurricanes, which are projected to increase in intensity with climate change. We have inland flooding, which has historically been one of the big issues for South Maui. Coastal erosion and ocean flooding, which will expand with sea level rise, and tsunamis with impacts that will be enhanced by rising water levels. So I'm going to mostly focus on coastal erosion and ocean flooding from high tides and high waves. And for South Maui in particular, high tide flooding will be an emerging issue in the future, which could be viewed as either a problem or even perhaps an opportunity. So I'll come back to that in a few moments. In terms of underscoring why we're here today, this graphic here is an oldie but a goodie. It comes from the Hawaii Coastal Hazard Mitigation Guidebook, which recommends to assess hazards in the earliest planning phases. So the graphic here shows these various planning stages. I think I can even get my laser pointer to work. Yep, planning stages over here compared to market value, investment expectations, community input, and government options. So by the time a property has been zoned and subdivided and developed, the market value and the investment expectations are very high, while the ability for community input and regulatory options become limited. So the community plan is one of the stages where assessing hazards can have a really important influence on the later planning stages. And in South Maui, we have very diverse environmental conditions. Fortunately, there are many examples of pretty healthy, wide beaches with coastal dune systems. Like you see here, this is an image of a restored coastal dune at Charlie Young Beach, which provides a natural form of protection from coastal hazards. And these beaches and dunes are critical community assets and resources that need to be protected and preserved. Unfortunately, we also have many examples in South Maui where development is threatened by erosion and by waves, and the natural systems of protection, like the reefs, the beaches, the wetlands, and the dunes, have been altered or lost. The image here shows a failed seawall in front of a condominium in Makale'a, and the sign, if you can see it, it actually reads, "Danger, seawall is crumbling." So looking to the future and resolving these issues, or at least hopefully avoiding more like them, is part of our collective charge in the planning process. Now, erosion is widespread throughout Hawaii and particularly on Maui. I think probably for those of you who know me and have heard me before, you may be familiar with these statistics. 85% of Maui shorelines are eroding in the long term. Maui has the highest rates of erosion statewide and the highest percentage of beach loss. And because our beaches are highly variable from season to season, we can have increased risks that way too. Some of the hotspots in South Maui include various places along South Kihei Road, like these two images on the left-hand side. We have worsening erosion and failing seawalls at Makale'a and along Halama Street, and also other forms of temporary erosion control like this here on Halama Street. Now at Halama Street, there is a real planning challenge because there is intense pressure there to redevelop along the shoreline, involving tearing down some of the smaller, older homes in favor of new, larger homes with larger footprints closer to the shoreline. At the same time, while our sea level rise maps and of course our experiences as well are indicating that these are very vulnerable properties. So as a real brief primer, erosion is caused by a combination of factors, including sea level rise, seasonal waves and storms, and these are exacerbated by human impacts, mostly related to shoreline armoring in South Maui. The historical response in Hawaii to erosion has been to armor the shoreline, which has led to beach loss and impacts to neighboring properties. So in this image on the left-hand side, a revetment protects a property from land loss, which leads to beach loss. And on the right-hand side, the unprotected property experiences land loss, but the beach is preserved. This beach preservation is possible if there is room for the beach system to migrate landward and there's a supply of sand in the backshore areas back here to feed the beach. Therefore, geology is important. So I want to point out that in South Maui, there's a rich supply of beach sand landward of the shoreline. We're looking here at the area around Kalama Park, right around here, and Halama Street. And the map here shows that it's marine and dune sands almost all the way back to Pi'ilani Highway, which is something maybe like 3/4 of a mile inland. This community was built on marine sands from former beaches and dunes and wetlands. By now, I'm sure many of you are already familiar with the sea level rise viewer and the sea level rise report. So going back to sea level rise. And the viewer, there's a screen grab here, provides us property scale maps of potential future exposure to sea level rise. The significance of the viewer is that it provides a tangible basis for planning and policy decisions at the property level. So if you haven't ever explored the sea level rise viewer, please do visit the website, hawaiisealevelriseviewer.org. Now, sea level rise will affect us in 3 different ways, and each of these is modeled and mapped in the sea level rise viewer. So the first way that sea level rise will affect us is through what's called passive flooding or high tide flooding. This flooding can come from the ocean or through the ground and is basically determined by the land elevation. This example here is from Makale'a Pond, where the model shows expanding wetlands, and the photo shows water spilling into the parking entrance, the parking lot entrance during high tides. With high tide flooding, we're going to start to see existing wetlands that are growing and expanding and new wetlands that are emerging. This type of flooding will be more pervasive in South Maui than in a lot of other regions around Maui, owing to a history of filling and developing wetlands. And so as sea level rises, the water will find its way up through the ground again. The images here on the left is the Halama Street area, and the right is the Kalama Park area. And you can see the blue flooded areas, which are pretty far away from the shoreline. And this is where the groundwater is already emerging or will continue to emerge further. So there is a major opportunity to use this information to preserve existing wetlands and plan around expanding and emerging wetlands. These areas provide important flood mitigation as well as many other ecosystem services. The second way that sea level rise will affect us is through wave flooding during seasonal high swells. So this is an example in the Kihei Canoe Club area, where flooding has been a nuisance in the past and will become more significant and more frequent going forward. Finally, the third way that sea level rise affects us is through coastal erosion. And so this is a form of land loss rather than flooding. This is an example again from Halama Street, where the properties are very vulnerable to erosion, here represented by future erosion represented by the red line, and existing seawalls are beginning to fail. I'll stop there. Those are the 3 ways: passive flooding, wave flooding, and coastal erosion that will be affected. And just emphasize that it's really important to look at all 3 types of sea level rise impacts separately and together when considering land use and development, because the adaptation and mitigation responses may be different for a site that's subject to seasonal flooding versus a site where land loss is a predominant issue. Finally, in terms of responding to coastal hazards, the options in the coastal management toolbox generally fall into the categories of protection, accommodation, ecosystem-based adaptation, and retreat. So at the extreme ends of the spectrum, protection or armoring, we know has consequences and is considered a solution of last resort. On the other end of the spectrum, doing nothing and letting things fall into the ocean is also not generally a desirable outcome. So the preferred strategies are the ones in the middle, including accommodation, which would be like elevating structures or reconfiguring them, ecosystem-based adaptation, which could involve dune, beach, and wetland restoration, and then finally managed retreat, which could involve relocation, or the long-term sort of incremental strategy of retreat is through setbacks. There is quite a bit of action that is relevant to South Maui that I really quickly want to mention. In terms of ecosystem-based solutions, the county does support a long-standing and successful dune restoration program, much of which has been focused in South Maui. Also, there is presently a study being initiated for the Makale'a beach, the Bay Beach area that I showed earlier in the images. The study will look at erosion mitigation options for that region. And finally, if you hadn't heard, the planning department has proposed new shoreline development setbacks, a form of managed retreat, that would be based on those future projections of erosion, that red line that we saw earlier in the sea level rise viewer. And the intent would be to site new development and redevelopment out of harm's way and protect the environment. That proposed policy is still going through a public review process before decision-making at the Planning Commission. I'll save it for later, but I have a great example from the Andaz resort that helps to visualize how setbacks can lead to relocation of buildings. And we can, of course, discuss any of these strategies in more detail during the question period. So I leave you with an image of beauty and resilience looking at a recently restored coastal dune at Kamaole 1 Beach Park with native pahuihui vines thriving. Mahalo nui loa.
Wonderful. Tara, thank you so much. So just to give you an example, an idea, the strategies that Tara went over and some of the solutions, those are the types of things that we would include in a draft and then would be further deliberated by the CPAC, the Maui Planning Commission, and the Maui County Council for inclusion into the community plan update, just in terms of how this information is used. Just want to remind folks, thank you so much for submitting questions. Let's please stay on topic and deal with what we're talking about tonight. Our next speaker is Diego Sanchez from the Department of Planning. And Diego is going to speak to you about coastal and inland flood hazards and really more of the regulatory perspective of the National Flood Insurance Program. So this is contained, for those of you that are interested, in Title 19, 19.62. So Diego, thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right, 1 second. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, let me see if this works. All right. Are you seeing the, let me see, stop presentation. Again, there we go.
We see it. Nice, Diego.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here, for all those watching. My name is Diego Sanchez. I work with the Department of Planning in Zoning, Administration, and Enforcement, and I'm the floodplain manager for the County of Maui. Today, we'll be looking at just the flood program for our island and how that relates to the federal regulations for development in the floodplain. So the objectives are to just get a basic understanding of what is the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. What does it mean? Explain the basics of flood zones and the 100-year flood. And then just present some updates on repetitive lost properties, particularly the flooding that's happened in Kihei, which is where we've had some of those, and just some recommendations for how to improve floodplain management for Maui County and particularly for the South Maui community area. So just a brief overview of what is the NFIP, or National Flood Insurance Program. It's basically a program that FEMA runs. It started in 1968, and it's a program that made flood insurance available and affordable nationwide. And so here to the right, we can see that after it was approved in 1968, a lot of communities started to join. And by the late 70s, early 80s, a large amount of communities around the US were part of it. Maui County joined in 1981. Being part of the NFIP of this FEMA program simply means that homeowners on Maui are able to obtain federally backed flood insurance. So anyone who is buying a home with a mortgage is going to get they're going to get a requirement to get flood insurance. And being part of the NFIP, being a community that enforces these FEMA flood standards community-wide, allows homeowners, property owners to get flood insurance. So The average flood insurance policy for our county costs $600 per year. For properties in high-risk areas, which can include coastal areas or areas near riverways, it can cost more than $10,000 a year. And for any property within the floodplain, there's a 25% chance of flooding during a 30-year mortgage. So in what's FEMA considers to be a flood hazard area. And so we might ask the question, why do we even build near flood zone areas or areas that are prone to flooding? Well, as human beings, sometimes this is not on Maui. It's just a photo from FEMA, but we love being near water. There's economic reasons for it. There's recreational reasons for it, real estate reasons. And oftentimes we choose to build in areas that we know are going to have flooding, but it is attractive to us as human beings to live there. So the question is, how do we follow these FEMA guidelines for flood development in a way that the infrastructure, buildings, and human beings are safe if we are going to develop in these areas that are prone to flooding? So before we go into that, we just want to define what it means to be in a flood zone according to FEMA. It just means to be an area deemed to be within the impact zone of the 100-year flood. So technically the whole island is a floodplain. Any part of the island can experience flooding at some point. However, FEMA defines flood zones or flood hazard areas as those zones that are going to be impacted by the 100-year flood, which is a flood event that has a 1% occurrence each year. Now, that said, this flood event could occur multiple times within a single year. It just means that there's a 1% chance of it occurring. But in the last few years, we had multiple 100-year flood events within one single year. Like the year we had Hurricane Lane, shortly thereafter, there was another flood event that was a 100-year flood. So it can happen multiple times in 1 year. It just means that there's a statistical likelihood that it happens. There's a 1% statistical likelihood that it happens in any given year. And so the area that we regulate is the 100-year floodplain. Places like Canada, they're more strict and they regulate up to the 500-year floodplain. So they regulate up to flood events that only have a 0.2% chance of occurring. With climate change and with rising coastal zones, this is something that FEMA is starting to consider whether we should increase our regulatory area to include higher flood events, since we're experiencing more flooding, but no word on that yet. And there's different classifications for flood zones depending on type of flooding. There's coastal, sheet flow, pooling, riverine flooding. We don't have to get into the exact details of them, but we'll take a look at Kihei, and I'll just describe some of the more common flood zones for Kihei. How do we find out what flood zones we are in if you're a property owner or you just want to explore? Well, the state of Hawaii has a nifty tool called the Flood Hazard Assessment Tool, FHAT, and here is the link. It's very easy to find on Google too if you just Google Hawaii Flood Hazard Assessment Tool, or you can call me here at Planning. I'm always happy to provide your flood zone. So here we're looking at how it looks like on the website, and this is in Kihei area. And so we can see, for example, the purple zone is zones that are prone to pooling, where there's a concave surface area. The red zones are coastal flooding zones, so which makes sense. They're right by the ocean. And then the blue zones are riverine flooding, areas where there's gulches or rivers or natural floodways where there's riverine flooding. For Kihei, the two major flood actions are the coastal tidal wave flooding, and also just all the water that comes from Mauka to Makai. So all the riverine flooding, all the gulches, and how it tends to pool in the urban areas that are concave and don't have a lot of drainage, right? So so that's just a quick overview of the Flood Hazard Assessment Tool. You can search your address or location, or you can search by your TMK number, your 9-digit tax map key here on the bottom right, and you can look at whether your parcel is in a flood hazard area. The green zones means you're outside of the 100-year floodplain. So you do not require a flood development permit. But any development, any project, no matter how small, if you are within a flood hazard area, meaning within the 100-year floodplain, it's eventually going to land on my desk, and we're going to have to review it through the process of a flood development permit. And this is so we can make sure that all developments in the floodplain are complying to FEMA standards, and we can continue to have the benefit of flood insurance for our whole community. So repetitive loss properties are properties or buildings rather, for which 2 or more claims exceeding $1,000 were paid by the NFIP within a 10-year period. So if you are a homeowner, a building owner, and you've had flooding and you have flood insurance through the NFIP, and you've had 2 or more claims exceeding $1,000, you automatically get placed into this category by FEMA called a repetitive loss property. So a total of about $7 million has been paid in NFIP claims, and all NFIP claims to Maui County since we started in the NFIP in 1981, since we joined. And in May 31st, 2018, we had 37 repetitive loss properties, of which 23 are in Kihei. So the majority of our repetitive loss properties, meaning properties that have experienced 2 or more flood events where $1,000 were paid, 23 of the 37 have been in Kihei. So that's something of concern, that we know already that keeping the South Maui area as healthy as possible in terms of floodplain management is incredibly important, since it's statistically and historically been the area that's most prone to flood damage. And just just something to consider, out of the $6.8 million total that has been paid in flood insurance claim, nearly $3 million, so almost half, has been paid to the repetitive loss property. So we see that almost half of the money that the NFIP program has paid to our community goes to just a few properties. And so when that happens, what do we do as a county? Well, we encourage homeowners to apply for some grants, federal grants, or to invest money that they're getting paid by their flood insurance to mitigate, either to elevate their building, flood proof it, or as Tara mentioned, there's other alternatives like seawalls or relocation in the worst case scenario. But in essence, here's where we as a county step in and give some recommendations to people who are experiencing repetitive flooding. And of those 37 homes that were repetitive loss properties, these were old homes that were not elevated when the damage occurred, meaning these homes were all built prior to 1981, which makes sense. They were built before we were examining floodplain regulations, which is to say, since 1981, none of the properties that have been built on Maui have become repetitive loss properties. So that kind of gives us reason to believe that the FEMA regulations are quite effective or somewhat effective, since all the development that has been monitored since 1981, none of it has resulted in a property becoming a repetitive loss property, at least so far. With climate change, things might change. So the map, the FEMA flood map that we saw in the online tool, is not always 100% accurate. These estimates for base flood elevations, for how high the flood waters will come, were done with hydrological models, 5, 10, 15 years ago in some parts of our island. So things change, right? So that doesn't mean that we can just blindly trust the map and say, well, if we build just like that, we will never ever experience flooding. The reality often has a way of thwarting our best intentions. So moving forward, just some comments real quick to close out as to from a floodplain manager perspective, what would be good for the South Maui community. Avoiding the entitling of lands for residential and commercial development within known flood hazard zones. So if we know that there are some zones that are flood hazard areas, we should try to zone them for something like agriculture or recreation, or something not necessarily for residential or commercial development. This one is a little bit in the weeds, but implement stricter substantial improvement regulations. This just means that if a building is not currently compliant and they're trying to renovate it, we should, as a county, like a hotel that's trying to put millions of dollars into renovations, we should first force the hotel to mitigate with that money and either elevate or flood proof itself. So we should encourage through our permitting process the prioritization of flood mitigation before homeowners or business owners can put money towards other things like aesthetic improvements or, you know, interior improvements. So that's something that we already do, but we could enforce it to a stricter degree and basically have building owners, property owners have to mitigate quicker. So what should we encourage within a flood hazard area or flood hazard zones, particularly high risk flood hazard areas? We should encourage agriculture, open space, open land recreation. We should encourage the county, the mayor to buy these lands, to keep them in perpetuity as open space or agricultural space or parks, things of that nature, so that those high risk flood hazard areas don't have commercial or residential infrastructure. And as we develop away from the ocean, which is encouraged, right, to not be building right along the coast, be aware of stream floodway hazards. In Kihei, there's so many gulches, and that whole Mauka to Makai area, there's so many little streams and rivers that some of them can really flood. And a lot of times that's where we see the bigger flooding, not so much the coastal flooding, but it's all the riverine flooding. So that's something to be aware of when development. Some of these rivers and gulches have not been fully studied by FEMA, but it doesn't mean that they can't flood. And on that note, we should encourage more healthy forest in the Mauka zone. So things like the Pu'ukukui Watershed Restoration Project here on the West Maui Mountains, things along that nature in the Mauka side of Kihei. So the more vegetation and forest you have upstream, the less just drainage you have coming down the mountain. So along with that, there's other things like just less pavement or bioabsorbable pavement that can absorb water. But basically, it's a lot of common sense things. The summary is that through this flood program, we are allowing you as a county citizen to get access to flood insurance and be able to protect your infrastructure. And basically anyone who wants to develop within a flood zone needs to talk to us in planning so we can make sure that you're doing things according to proper FEMA standards. That's all. Thank you very much.
Diego, mahalo. Thanks so much. Yeah, great suggestions. So for example, some of the things that Diego's mentioning are fantastic. I mean, let's try to reduce the amount of repetitive flood loss we have. We've got hotspot areas and we know what's causing it. And so one of the things that the community plan can do through our policies and implementing actions is try to mitigate the damages caused by flooding, man-made flooding. So Diego, thanks so much. So next on tap, we have Gina Albanese, and Gina works with the Maui Emergency Management Agency. And there you see the Emergency Operations Center, the EOC. Hey, Gina. So MEMA, basically, one of the things you think about with MEMA is when we do have a disaster, whether it's a tsunami or a wildfire or particular flooding and hurricanes, the EOC gets activated. And they are very much in a response mode at that time. One of the things that Gina can speak to us about in terms of what they do and how they do what they do as its relation to the community planning effort is our questions we get from you all are shelters. Where are the shelters? How can we have hurricane approved shelters? Those types of things, as well as evacuation routes. Evacuation routes are very important, particularly in terms of how neighborhoods are laid out and making sure people, there's some very precarious areas in South Maui that we're familiar with. Finally, the hazard mitigation plan. And this is very important. The first ever Maui County multi-hazard mitigation plan was developed in October 2000. And just so folks know, we do a lot of cross-referencing back and forth between the policies, the identifications of issues, and addressing the problems that are identified in the hazard mitigation plan. It has to be done per the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. It must be done, must be approved by the county as well as FEMA, or there will be no public disaster assistance. So Gina plays and Mima play a critical role. So many thanks to you, Gina. Hey, Herman, good to see you. And thanks for speaking today.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much for having us. I have with me here Herman Andea. He's our administrator for the Maui County Emergency Management Agency. And I have Colleen Hutman, who's a very important part of this. She's our recovery specialist. So she also works with hazard mitigation, planning. You can go to the next slide, please. As you know, here in Maui, we have a lot of natural disasters. We've seen in the last 20 years, major flooding, major hurricanes, definitely the volcanic eruptions on the Big Island. I know that fires are a big issue in South Maui, and also tsunamis. All right, next. We also have to deal with that most of the time people forget really is that we can have disasters that are from hazardous materials, plastic, which we're seeing in our oceans. There could be issues with power plants. That is very close to South Maui. We also have natural and liquefied gas facilities, cyber attacks, and terrorists. And these, thank you. So the Emergency Management Agency is forever changing and moving. It's applying science from all the community stakeholders, businesses, community members, the hazard mitigation. So there's the technology, and there's also planning and management, which we're a big part of also. As South Maui is planning for climate change, all of that information is going to be brought, and we're going to be at the EOC doing exercises, updating our plans, and making sure that we know anything that's going to happen in South Maui, that we're going to be able to take care of that and respond to that appropriately. So to save from extreme events, we want to make sure that we, injury and kill large numbers. I'm sorry. So to save from extreme events that can injure and kill large numbers, extensive damage to property and critical facilities such as electricity and water, it also disrupts community life. And that is what is being seen right now with the climate, is that these are out of our control, but they are disrupting our communities so much. And we have to plan for this in every phase. Next slide, please. So emergency manager's role, which is Herman Andea here, he has an alliance. It's with all government at all different levels, private sector, businesses, volunteer agencies, is Red Cross, Feed My Sheep, then there's faith-based groups. So these are all stakeholders in South Maui that need that needs to have input from the community to make sure that everything is where it needs to be in regards to planning and responding. The leader role is through an incident command system, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Also, he has to know the emergency operations plan, knowledge of hazards, and community vulnerabilities. So the federal response plan, I had put there in a website for you if you want to get more information on the response plan, because it does involve South Maui, and it's important that everybody who lives in South Maui understand these plans that FEMA have given us to be able to respond correctly. So it also says that local jurisdictions must be able to operate without external help for 72 hours. But as we know, being on an island, that we need to really have it more than 72 hours. We should at least have for at-home sheltering a week, and then for evacuation sheltering, at least 2 weeks. We have to be able to take care of ourselves. The local governments that are not always responsible for the things that happen in regards to disasters. So citizens need to understand what response plans are for their families and their community. Planning is huge, which is the long-term planning here. We also do planning. We make sure that we have evacuation plans and emergency operation plans. And the big thing next is hazard mitigation. Diego was just talking about repetitive losses. In order so that we don't have that, we need to mitigate different items to a particular situation so that doesn't happen again. For example, retrofitting your home with hurricane hardware, local bridges, making sure that they are sound and they're not going to wash away when a flood comes, especially the gulch and ravines and the bridges that are near those areas. A big thing is preparedness. Preparedness is really important too. Maui County is going to be putting their preparedness guide onto their website here in the next week or two. And there's a lot of information in there. Then the next big thing is response. Of course, that comes from all the emergency departments and communities, stakeholders. And then we have the recovery process, which we are in a recovery process right now from a FEMA federal declaration for the March 8th damages that happened in a haiku. And that is letting us, we're getting assistance for our infrastructure, our roads, our public buildings, debris removal, and of course, what it took for the emergency response for the March event. And then most importantly, recovery, because recovery is rebuilding. It's making it better. It's helping us to look at what happened and plan next time better. Put hazard mitigation in there. What can we do better to prepare? What can we do better to respond? These are really important elements in recovery. And everybody's involved in that, not just the emergency management agency. Everybody's involved in that. Next slide, please. So this is an emergency operations center. It's not ours, but we are hoping that next year we can have something bigger and nicer like that. And this is a EOC. And this is where everything happens when there's a disaster near or occurring. For example, a terroristic threat, the EOC would be activated. Hazardous waste spills, EOC would be activated. Flooding in South Maui. That, as that comes along over the next 20 years, emergency management has to be able to help the public be able to understand what they need to do in order to keep their families safe. And it might mean doing something that we really don't want to do, but it needs to be done if we're going to keep our land, if we're going to keep, you know, the want to rebuild on the grounds as far as dune restoration to prevent sand and trees from washing into the ocean. Next slide, please. So the functions of an emergency operations center, activated during a state of emergency, there's information management, there's collecting and analyzing data, sharing essential information. This comes from every department, every stakeholder. And in a few minutes, I can show you some of the departments and stuff that are here in EOC when it's activated. There's resource management, coordinations of support, as far as support for police department, fire department, volunteer agencies. Also, requests for items, services, deployment of specialized group. For example, the specialized group may be the National Guard to assist in logistics of delivering goods that may have been damaged from from disasters. And next slide, please.
Gina, we have about 2 more minutes. Just want to know.
Planning, we have coordinate. We determine current and future needs. The incident command system is command by leadership. Control point for activities and operations. Next slide. All right, see, these are some of the agencies that will come into the EOC during an activation. As you can see, Coast Guard, Department of Health, Environmental Management, Fire Department, Public Safety, Housing and Human Concerns. We have national parks, so we do have federal agencies here also. And could you go to the next slide, please? The planning department, of course, you folks are in here, Pam and Kate, the police department, public works and highways, transportation, utilities, volunteer organizations active in disasters, which is our VOED, and even the water supply. So all these agencies are in the EOC, and we're all working together in response and in recovery after also. Can I have next slide, please? So this coordinated effort is through the National Incident Management System, NIMS, and it lays the groundwork for efficient and effective responses. Structure that is followed by every response agency, whether it's here in Maui or somewhere else. It provides commonality and preparedness and response efforts, which means somebody from the mainland could come here and know exactly what the protocols are and what they need to do without having to be trained on that. So it readily integrates established unified command during an incident. Next slide, please. And when EOC is not in activation, this is what we do. We're always planning. We're always developing emergency operations, and we're going over them all the time. Sheltering, evacuation, definitely exercises. This is where you learn. This is where you practice to make sure that we're doing it right. Hazard mitigation to make it better, preparedness. Always check your kits, know where to go if there's a disaster, and it starts home and the community. And then finally, we have response and recovery, local, state, federal, all stakeholders, businesses, communities, and healthcare. One more slide, please. And this is very important. We'd like to get more people involved in this, especially folks from South Maui. This is a community emergency response team. They're volunteers who get involved, learn about the principles of emergency management. They're trained in basic disaster response skills such as fire safety, search and rescue, team organization, medical operations. They're the eyes on the ground. The community response can make a difference. And so for more information, or just more information that you'd like to have about emergency management, our website is up below there. Please feel free to send us a message and we will try to get you involved in CERT, signed up for CERT, and answer any questions you have, because it involves everybody. It involves everybody. Mahalo. Thank you.
Gina, thank you so much. Herman, good to see you. Nice to see you, Colleen. So our next and final speaker before we kick off to our Q&A session is Makale'a, who's the environmental coordinator, and she works under the Mayor's Office of Climate Action. She's going to speak to some of the stuff that they're doing with regard to resilience. I had mentioned that a lot of these issues that impact South Maui, hazards and climate change and sea level rise, are interdependent. And so Maka's going to speak to us about some of the things with regard to low impact development, dealing with non-point source, stormwater runoff, and all these other types of impacts and how that they can be addressed over the long term. All right, thank you so much.
Hi, aloha. Wau o Shana Makale'a dudua ane no Mililani Oahu mai ao o Kahalui Maui no ho'ana. I ka'ena o hoholu. Aloha, my name is Makale'a Ane, and I'm the Resilience Officer in the Mayor's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Today I'm going to just going to get my slideshow started here. Today I'm going to talk about the different hazards, of course, that you guys are experiencing in South Maui, but also the opportunities such as nature-based and indigenous solutions to climate change. The presenters earlier had a lot of data and tools that scientists use today to really project and see what climate change looks like, is how it's going to affect us in the future. But we can also look to the past, look to see how Native Hawaiians kiloed or observed their natural resources and the events around them. And we can also find them in papers. So a lot of, historical knowledge about what happened in the past. And so how do we integrate what happened before and how Hawaiians managed their natural resources and their aina, but how do we really put it into policy and planning? And so this was a paper by John Ching that really looked at, the Ahupua'a system, what were the different zones in the Ahupua'a and how we managed it. And then you can also see, where we developed, where our hales were, where our houses were. They were not near the coast, right on the beaches. It was tucked away closer to the hillsides and away from the streams. And the streams really were more for agricultural purposes, such as lo'i, and the coastal zones had fish ponds. So as you guys know, you guys have totally experienced all of these hazards. So we have the potential fire coming in across the plains and the isthmus. We have storms and riparian flooding, taking sediment down to the ocean. And then, as Tara talked about, sea level rise. So you guys are getting it from all angles. So what are the solutions? So just to recap, this fire, you guys have experienced all of the hazards in the last probably, year or 5 years. So fires, flooding, you guys have made the news. And as Diego had talked about, there's riparian flooding, but these really do sit in the areas that just capture this water, and it sits there because of the design, because we filled in wetlands and sand dunes that were made to permeate the water, and instead we have impervious surfaces. So how do we get back to nature? So I'm going to talk about some of the solutions that we can, that we've identified that really look at our nature and integrate nature-based solutions, low-impact designs, and really just protect the natural resources that we have. So we can put green buffers around streams. We can put low-impact design and development in our communities, in our residential areas, and we can protect the wetlands, like everybody has said, and protect our natural resources, protect the wetlands that were here previously. So this picture is an example of low-impact design and development. At the Foodland in Maui, we have curb cuts that take the water from the paved surfaces and then put them into our medians. And also they don't put curbs around the trees so that they can continue and infiltrate the water as fast as possible instead of letting it pool up. And so this is a closer look at curb cuts. So you have the oil slicks from the parking lots will go into the curb cut onto the grass and hopefully get absorbed before going into the storm drains. And so this is an example from Ka'anapali. We created a curb cut. The water goes into this rocky area and then into planted bioswales and vegetation. This happens to be some native plants and kalo, but any native vegetation that's designed for that area and can fit in that zone would be great. And we also have other low impact designs, such as these pavers. And so this is one of our planners on the call, this is actually in front of her house, which I didn't know. I just stopped by and took a picture of somebody installing new pavers. And this is green, just grass. And then another person on the same street has the same pavers with grass growing in it. This is the Bank of Hawai'i in Kahului that is paved with pervious asphalt or pervious concrete, which lets the water drain into the parking lot instead of running off and going into our storm drains. So really, when we talk about nature-based and indigenous solutions to climate change, we're looking at solutions that across the whole landscape. They're not just designed for one specific event or activity. They can really, we have triple benefits, right? They can protect nature, they can protect our homes, but sometimes they can even provide resources to ourselves. So we have coral reef protection in the ocean, fish pond restoration. We can do riparian buffer zones and planting up in the Mauka region. So really looking at the whole ahupua'a to really create this treatment train, it's called, specific actions at different places within the ahupua'a. So this is an aerial view of, this is Ko'i'e'i'e fish pond, but these are two other fish ponds, maybe even three, located along the Kihei coast. And so fish ponds are great at creating that buffer during tsunamis so that it can take that wave action. Also during high storm events can create a buffer for your homes on the shoreline, and also wetland protection. So this is from the South Maui Watershed Plan, which identified that there was, in 1965, there was 199 acres of wetland that was identified in Kihei. So, really looking at, I think Diego, everybody had said this previously, that the wetlands that we have now, we need to protect them. So how do we identify funding sources, plans, zoning, and really protect these wetlands, because that protects the other homes around us. And if you build in a wetland, you're going to continue to have flooding events, and we've already built too much in the wetlands, so let's preserve those. And Diego also mentioned that we have in the uplands, you can replant and reforest our music forests. This is an example of Pu'ukukui Watershed Preserve. In 2017, planted 6,000 trees, or 2 acres, in pretty much like an hour. And so all of these flags are different plants, native plants. And at the sound of the pu, somebody blew the pu and everybody had their plant, and they planted in their designated flag, and we planted 2.5 acres in an hour. It was amazing. In Hawaii, there is a state procurement directive that says that we're gonna hit these benchmarks of requiring the use of native Hawaiian plants in public that use public funding. So by 2019, 10% of any project needs to be native plants. By 2025, 20%, and 2030, 30%. So these are just standards that we should be meeting, but we can always do better. This picture is a parking lot in Kauai, actually. So you have your parking lot, but you can still plant with native plants, and then sort of a bioswale where the water can go in and infiltrate the rocks in drier areas. It doesn't need to be all native plants, but plants designated for that zone. And also the county is really working hard on complete streets. And so, you have your typical complete street, but you can also have these riparian buffer zones or bioswales integrated into these complete street designs. And so lastly, the County of Maui is working on a resiliency strategy. This is an example from Oahu, but identifying action steps that would help us mitigate climate change and really create resilient communities. And so you can always learn more about what you can do to take climate action. And living on an island, it's so hard to think of what we can do to really impact climate change. Is such a global issue, but this dashboard really helps you identify different action steps that you personally can take to reduce your carbon footprint and save money. A lot of the actions in here are just simply hanging up your clothes on a clothesline instead of using the dryer and putting that water like our grandparents did. We put the water from the dryer into the banana patch. So you're growing food with water that you don't have to waste. So thank you very much. And I'll be here for questions. Thank you. Aloha.
Oh, mother. All right, there we go. Makale'a, wonderful, wonderful presentation. That was great. And you had really great pictures, and thanks for those examples. That was exciting. So thank you so much for doing that. Just one quick question. If you could put in the chat box so folks can take a look at, because those resiliency strategies are really fantastic the way they're laid out in terms of just explaining the issue, in terms of moving forward. That would be really great. We're going to now shift over to questions, some Q&A that you guys have been submitting, and thank you for that. And I thought what I'd do is stick with, Mark did such a great job talking about trees and shade and the importance of native vegetation. I'm going to take a look here. It looks like we had a question about how to address tree loss in the South Maui Community Plan. And I think this person might have been talking about basically how can we perhaps get more trees, and in the context of climate resilience and what we're talking about today. I thought perhaps with the, how do you address the heat index? Rising heat, less rain, more heat index, a lot of walkable areas in Kihei and South Maui that are not shaded. And I think perhaps one of the things, and anyone want to talk about that today, but one of the things that we could talk about with regard to addressing more trees is, of course, that can be a policy. That can be conditional upon development. That can be, conditional upon parking areas, perhaps having more trees in those areas. But would any of the panelists like to comment on that? Maybe some ideas on how we can have more trees and more shade to address things such as rising heat index. Makale'a, do you want to take a crack at that one?
I think you did a great job. Yeah, exactly. I mean, through input into this community plan update, we can say we want better buffer zones around our streams, and that gives opportunities to community groups and organizations to do some restoration. Also, saying during development that we would like to, one of our examples was plant with native trees. There's landscape has to go in. Let's mandate a percentage that has to be native. Thanks.
Great answer. Okay, I've got another one that I might be directing at jointly with Diego and Tara, and that is on South Kihei Road, just south of Kanolu Road. There is a temporary crossing sitting atop the original crumbling box culvert of the Kulahikaoi River Gulch. Is that safe in a large storm or tsunami? When that collapses, all traffic reverts to be Ilani Highway. Is there any plan in place in an emergency? So I'll have Tara, Diego take a crack at that, and then maybe, I don't know if Mima might know something about that as well.
I think it's a very good question that I wouldn't have the answer to. Is it safe during a coastal hazard event? It would really be a question I think we would want to direct to Public Works. And they have engineers there that are responsible for that temporary bridge. I do know there are plans to replace the temporary bridge. And I don't know what the current timeline on that is. It's definitely a Public Works question.
Yeah, I would agree. It's an infrastructure question, so Public Works manages that. At best, I would need to look at our flood map and see whether that's a FEMA designated floodway and what the level of risk is. But I would need to have the TMK or address just to provide, because I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head where it's located. So, a great question.
Awesome. Thanks, Diego. Thanks, Tara. Mima, I don't know if you have anything to add, but yeah, I agree. This is a definitely a Public Works question. I'm gonna pop to the next one, the next question. And this one's gonna be directed at Tara. Can you explain and perhaps go over a little bit? This, I think, is a good first question before we have a lot of other questions for you. And that is, can you explain the natural movement of sand and how it relates to beach restoration?
Oh, okay. You guys are gonna like really stretch my brain today. Okay, right. So beaches and dunes are they're all part of right, an ecosystem and a natural system that's always moving and shifting and reshaping. And that includes the sand that you don't see on the dry beach that's under the water as well. So a healthy beach system will have sand offshore, onshore, and up in the dune system. And with the changing conditions from season to season, we have sand grains. They're always moving around in the system, going up and down the beach and on and off the shoreline, and both at the same time. And that is what a beach is naturally designed to do. I guess the second part of that question is how does beach restoration, I guess, affect that? I suppose it would depend on the exact type of project, but the thing is, with sea level rise, our beaches our shorelines are migrating landward, and some of our beaches are narrowing. And in places where beach restoration is used and where it's an appropriate solution, the idea is to recycle sand that was originally on that beach and maybe eroded away and is stored somewhere in an offshore location and put it back on the beach. And then the natural processes continue from there, including that the erosion continues.
Awesome. Thanks, Tara. So Diego, one of the questions we got, I think might come your way. And panelists, if any of you want to add to the answer, please feel free to do so. But I'll start with Diego. For you, are there any low impact designs required for new development, or would you have any suggestions?
Yeah, no, that is a great question, particularly because in terms of the flood program, we do get more benefits or more discounts in our flood insurance if we enforce low impact designs somewhere in our building code. So that's more of a public works question, because the building code is their Kuleana, not planning department's Kuleana. But I do know, for example, that Public Works over the last few years, they have started to have some LID options within project developments, including just having less concrete, having more green spaces, absorbable areas for buildings and things of that nature. It's in the building code if one does a Control F search for low impact design or LID. They have a few guidelines for that. So, and I do believe Michael Quijano and the folks at Public Works are trying to expand that program. So basically so that they can keep all of the drainage and all of the infrastructure less less busy when it rains. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Diego.
Yeah.
Makale'a, we had somebody ask if that wonderful complete street shot you showed, where that was located.
Oh, shucks. That was a theoretical picture. It's not for Kihei, but it really can show that, when we create these complete streets, that we can integrate other low impact designs, not just only for pedestrians and bikers, but for the environment as well.
No, but those are great shots to have because people can visualize. It was really, really good shot.
Yeah, we have to get one for Kihei.
Yes. All right, thank you. All right, Tara, I think you might be the best person on the call right now to answer a really tough question, but I think it's an important question, and that is folks are asking, how is beach construction being allowed at the old Maui Lu site? The runoff of soil into the ocean, basically sitting on top of the reef, Makale'a, the highway. So some folks are asking those questions.
Okay. Well, and I'm assuming the question is more like knowing what we know about the future and some of the projections we have of erosion and wave flooding. Why is redevelopment occurring on the Makai side of the road? And maybe you're asking about the Mauka side of the road as well, because the property spans both sides of the road. Probably better if this question was addressed by someone officially from the county, but I'll share what I do understand about it. And I would like to say that I'd like to think that if this project was coming in for permits today, that the outcome would be very different. There's a long, complicated history there, and the entitlements and the permits go back decades to like the 90s and the early 2000s. So back then, I know there were discussions of coastal hazards and environmental impacts. And as I understand, like one of the main mitigation agreements that they settled on, which was proactive at the time, given what they knew and like the social and political environment at the time, which was that they would remove the habitable structures of the shoreline. So what you see being developed there now is like a pool and an accessory structure, which again, you could definitely argue, it is not good given what we now understand. But again, it goes back to this long history of entitlements from a long time ago when things were a little bit different. I know that's not a satisfying response, but that's my understanding.
No, thank you, because that is definitely a tough one. But I think people need to understand though about the entitlements and the timing of that one. Thanks, Tara. Diego, we just got a quick question about folks, if you want to look in the chat. People asking about the flood hazard tool that you mentioned, how to get to that, how to find that. So I didn't know if you could post the link in the chat or how people can Google and find. Pretty easy.
Sure. So if you go on Google and just Google Hawaii flood hazard tool, it'll be the first link. It's gis.hawaiinfip.org, gis.hawaiinfip.org. And I can post the link here in the Zoom chat because I don't have Facebook open, unfortunately, but
that's okay. It's all right.
I posted it here.
Awesome.
And I can also provide my email or phone if people want help or need some guidance on how to use it. We're always here at Zayed, happy to provide folks with information and help them navigate the tool.
Cool. Thanks, Diego.
Yeah.
Hey, Makale'a, we have a good question. Where can you get the pavers that the grass grows through?
Oh, I've seen those at Home Depot and Lowe's.
Oh, there you go. On island, maybe. Okay, no, awesome. Great. Thanks so much. Okay, I think I've got one for, actually another one. Here we go for Tara. I am not up on this alphabet soup. I'm drawing a blank. Is it reasonable to say we should not now construct anything Makai of the NSCR corridor? Why am I not understanding NSCR? I should know this. I know I should. NSCR corridor.
it north-south Collector Road, maybe?
Oh, very, that
That's
would make
correct.
sense. Okay. Ding, 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 ding. Great. Thanks.
Oh, this is always, I don't know if you could categorically say we shouldn't be building Makale'a of some certain location. What I would say is we look at the data we have and the models, and that's what the sea level rise viewer helps us with, and kind of look at individual areas and properties and see what hazards they really are subjected to. Remember I said earlier, like, some areas are more subject to erosion, some areas are more subject to high wave flooding, and how we respond to those things may be different. It may be not that you can't build there, but you have to think about exactly how you do your construction and your siting. And in other places, it might be obvious that you shouldn't build there too.
Oh, okay, yeah. No, great. That's a really good answer. Okay, Diego, kind of a mapping question. Wondering, if you might know, do we have any map records that display the historical flow of storm drainage through the many gulches connecting South Maui, Makale'a? Looking for maps that show which gulches flow the most, maybe the most flashy, the extent of flooding, flow rate and area, and changes of the natural flow over the years with roadway and other developments. Maybe any of the folks on the panel, maybe Herman, maybe EOC, if anybody might know.
Sure. So as far as the natural condition of just the floodways themselves, FEMA has historical flood maps that are available in our flood hazard tool. So you can click and look at the previous flood maps that FEMA had done. We have some going back to the 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, and then 2015 is our newest one. So that's just basically the natural hydrology of the streams that FEMA has studied. Granted, they haven't studied all of the gulches or streams because there's so many of them on Maui, but quite a few are studied. As far as more like data in terms of infrastructure, in terms of like public works, diversions and things of that nature, we'd have to look with public works. I do have some records of areas that have flooded in Kihei and just different records of public works infrastructure that got flooded, that had damage and things of that nature, but I'm not sure if there's anything super comprehensive all together. You'd have to piece a bunch of different maps and methods.
No, that's a great tool. That's a great start. I remember back in 2000 when we were doing the community risk and vulnerability assessment and focused on Kihei and the gulch flooding and impacts from that. There was modeling done by Will Orr and stuff like that. There may be stuff, I don't know, folks at MEMA, if in any of the hazard mitigation past plans and updated plans, sometimes going into the risk and vulnerability assessment, there might be information about these types of things because they have to be updated every 3 to 5 years. I don't know if that might be included, if anybody would know.
Pam, there is information in the updated hazard mitigation plan update that was done in 2020. In fact, what I read here, the FEMA flood zones, these are the firm maps. I guess they're looking at all the firm maps and everything. And Kia McKenna, there's like, I guess what they consider flood zones, it's about 4,561 acres or 18.4% of the total countywide SFHA. So there's this is very useful. It's a 1,000-page document, and I'm sure you'll be able to find information about the floods, especially in South Maui.
Is the latest version of the hazard mitigation plan, is that on the easiest way to find it? Go to the county website and go to MEMA. And do you guys have that posted? Would there be a link to that if folks want to take a look?
Yes, you can find it mauicounty.gov/emergency. And in fact, I'll have Gina put it on the chat room as well.
Okay, awesome. Great. Thanks, Herman. Okay.
Yeah, one last thing too, just to add to that question, it might help also to just backtrack and ask, what are we trying to do? So instead of just getting a bunch of information rather asking like, what project are you trying to do? Where exactly are you trying to do it? And then based on that, you can look for more specific information relevant to the area where you're going to be, perhaps, doing a project. So you can start with whatever your intention is and go from there. So.
No, that's important clarification. Thanks, Diego.
Yeah.
All righty, Makale'a, got a question for you. Somebody's asked a question about how can we implement an aggressive urban tree planting project right away? And before you answer, just wanted to let you folks know that, for example, in the West Maui Community Plan, just as an idea of how we're incorporating this good information into the community plan update, the West Maui Community Plan, there is an action to conduct a baseline study of West Maui's urban tree canopy and to establish a goal for canopy cover to increase and basically devise that strategy on how to achieve that goal. So at any rate, just wanted to let folks know how we've addressed that in West Maui, and love to hear what you have to say as well, Makale'a.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a great example of how to incorporate trees into the urban environment. And also really how I was talking about looking to the past to really inform decisions of the future. The historic name for like how we got the name Kihei, to my understanding, is it was the cloud that covered the aina there, and it was like the Kihei, the cloak on the land, but the name of the cloud is Na'ulu. So Na'ulu means to grow. And so really like having that cultural connection again and really looking at how we can grow again in Kihei. So a couple of things that I thought of was really to just work with the landowner's mauka to be able to see how we can do restoration, like I showed you with Pu'ukukui doing music forest restoration. We have a lot of watershed groups that really do landscape restoration. So, maybe starting or working with the watershed groups right now to do starting a watershed project. And then also looking at like if we have bigger projects like renewable energy projects, they're required to put the land back to how they got it. So right now it's degraded ag land. So we can do better. I'm always going to say that we can always do better. How do we say, no, don't restore it to degraded ag land? What was it before? It was music forest. So let's restore it. You take out your solar energy project and let's plant native plants.
Great answer. Right now, we don't have any questions that are active, so I was gonna kind of toss the baton over to Tara, who's always got tons and tons and tons and tons of information, to see if she could take a look at maybe more specific drill down hotspot locations in Kihei using the viewer.
Oh boy, it's a live demo without the live audience right here in
Always
front of
exciting.
me.
SNL, here we go.
Well, okay, so what I don't know who's out there, and I would assume many of you are familiar with the sea level rise viewer, but some of you may not be. So let's do a quick drive through, and if you go to the website Hawaii Sea Level Rise Viewer.org, you come to this web page. This is sort of the home page, but here's the map viewer, and what I usually do. Oh, you can't see. Haha. Now you can see, huh? Let me get myself set up here. So this is the main page. And what I usually do is click on view full screen map, and you see the Hawaiian Islands. You can use these boxes here at the top to jump to any particular site. So I'll take us to, let's say, North Kihei. Then you go over here, and these tabs are sort of how you drive yourself around. So if you want to look at satellite imagery, you click on base maps and you turn on satellite. And then we go to here. The most important tab probably is exposure. And these are the mapping layers and the models I referred to earlier, how sea level rise affects us 3 different ways. So you can turn on the layers for passive flooding with different sea level rise thresholds. You can turn on the layers for annual high wave flooding with various thresholds. And you can look at coastal erosion. Again, it's good to look at all these individually and then look at how they combine to create an overall exposure area in any given location. So we had an earlier question about the north-south collector road, and I don't actually know which parts of the road are referred to as the north-south collector road, and I don't know how in this virtual setting somebody could point those out, but this is the area we're looking at. Is that right, Kate, or anybody? Can you confirm?
Yeah, that's the area.
Yeah, that's the area. So I think somebody was asking, should we like, avoid development seaward of that area? And so, we should probably answer those questions by looking at the data. And if you turn on some of the hazard layers here, right now I'm looking at, I've turned on the annual highway flooding with 3 feet of sea level rise. And I've turned on the coastal erosion, the red line with 3 feet of sea level rise. And you can see that, within at least this time frame we're looking at, maybe 2060 to 2100, certainly South Kihei Road will be impacted, but not the areas that appear to be Makai of the collector road. However, there are other overlays down here in this tab. And you can also turn on, and Diego was referring to the flood hazard zones, which you should find in the tool that he mentioned earlier, the flood hazard assessment tool. But just for convenience, we've placed those in the sea level rise viewer as well. So you can turn on the flood layers. I'm going to turn off some of these other layers. And you can also find out what flood zone you're in, or some of these areas fall in. And so you can see some of the big floodways, and those are usually depicted, those are usually AE, inland flooding zones. The pink areas here represent the V zones, which mean you're getting flooding from the ocean. So good to look at those. And if we zoom in again to sort of the collector road area, we're looking at, V zone along the shoreline and A zones, behind that. One other new thing, even if you're familiar with the sea level rise viewer and have used it a lot already, some recent additions that I want to point out are there's this new layer called the coastal flood hazard zone with sea level rise. Basically, you can think of this as a future V zone. So we have this FEMA V zone, which represents flooding that occurs coming from the ocean. And this blue layer, I'm going to turn on the FEMA flood layer again. So the pink layer is the existing flood zone, the V zone, and this new blue layer represents this V zone that's modeled with 3 feet of sea level rise. So you can kind of see where we're expecting, another way of looking at how we're expecting event-based ocean flooding in the future. So this includes hurricanes and tsunamis. And if you ever have a question about what these layers mean or how they're modeled or what they represent, you can click on these little information buttons. You'll get a bit more information, and then they usually link to a much more detailed explanation on the Sea Level Rise Viewer website. So that's a very quick tour. We could keep going, and if there's any particular area of interest out there from the audience, maybe we'd have a way of finding those out and zooming around, or I'll let Pam take it from here.
No, Tara, that was flawless, live and everything with technology involved. I'm incredibly impressed. We are unbelievably at our time already, 6 o'clock. So just a quick reminder to let folks know that all the PowerPoints you watched today are already up and on the website for you to take a look at. You can take a look at the Facebook recording of this if you want to see the Q&A or if you missed any of it and the answers. But with that, I want to give a huge virtual round of applause to our wonderful speakers, Tara Owens, Diego Sanchez, Gina Albanese, Makale'a Ana. Thank you guys so much. You guys did a great job. Thanks for your answers to the questions on the fly. And the only other announcement I have is that come late June, July sometime, please be posted, take a look. We will have a town hall on housing. How we're going to be addressing housing and affordable and workforce housing in South Maui through the community plan. So thanks everybody so much for your attendance. Thank you all to our speakers, and thanks especially to our Facebook audience for all your interest and Q&A. Mahalo. Good night, everybody. Ahuyo.
We hope.